I don't know if I should be writing this down. Every time I replay it in my head, I feel that same creeping chill in my stomach, the same weight pressing on my chest. But I can't keep it to myself any longer. Maybe someone out there has gone through something similar. Maybe someone can tell me what the hell happened. This was last winter, during my master's at Edinburgh University in England. Edinburgh wasn't one of the big famous universities, but it was old. The kind of place where the stone buildings seemed to sweat history, and the damp cold crept into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. I stayed in one of the student dorms, Westwood Hall, a tall, gray-bricked block on the edge of campus. Built in the 1960s, it had the same charm as a hospital: peeling paint, flickering fluorescent lights, radiators that hissed and clanged in the night. My room was 207 on the second floor, which I shared with my roommate, Emily Carter. Emily was easygoing, always laughing, always FaceTiming her boyfriend at odd hours. We weren't inseparable, but she was good company. When the winter break rolled around in January, most of the students in Westwood packed up and left for home. The building that normally buzzed with voices and slammed doors suddenly emptied out. It wasn't that I didn't want to go home, I missed my family, but the work was piling up. 2 essays, a presentation, and a draft of my dissertation. I couldn't afford to fall behind. So I convinced myself that staying in an almost empty dorm would help me concentrate. Emily thought I was insane. "You'll regret it," she said, stuffing clothes into her suitcase on Saturday, January 8th, around 5 p.m. "This place is creepy enough with people here. Alone? God, you'll hear every pipe groan and every shadow move." She laughed as she said it, but the words left me uneasy. I walked her down to the front doors as she dragged her suitcase behind her. Outside, the sky was already dark, the street lamps glowing weakly in a thick blanket of fog. Typical English winter. She gave me a wave before heading off toward the station, her figure fading into the mist. By the time I climbed back up to the second floor, Westwood Hall felt like a mausoleum. The long corridor stretched away, lined with closed doors, silent as the grave. My footsteps echoed in a way they never had before, bouncing back at me from the bare, tiled walls. That night, I tried to study. I sat up at my desk, surrounded by books and papers, tapping notes into my laptop. The silence pressed against me, broken only by the hum of the radiator. At 11:46 p.m., I was halfway through an article when I heard it, footsteps in the corridor. I froze. They weren't faint or distant. They were right outside my door. Steady, unhurried, drawing closer. I thought maybe it was the night porter making rounds. But then the sound stopped, and my lock clicked. The door opened. And there was Emily. She stood in the doorway with her suitcase, her hair a little messy, scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. She smiled like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Hey," she said, dragging the bag inside. "Plans changed. Thought I'd stay the week after all." I just stared at her. "Wait, didn't you leave? I watched you walk into the fog not even 6 hours ago." "Yeah," she said quickly, brushing it off. "Didn't work out." "It's fine, I'll stay here." I should have pressed her. I should have asked what happened, why she turned back. But honestly, I was relieved. The silence of Westwood Hall had been gnawing at me all evening, and her presence suddenly made the room feel alive again. That night, we sat on our beds and talked. She asked about my work, complained about her supervisor, joked about how eerie the hallways felt. It felt normal. By the time I went to bed, I was almost grateful she had returned. But something felt wrong. She was Emily in every obvious way, her voice, her clothes, her mannerisms. But small details were off. For one, she never touched her phone. Emily lived on Instagram, she scrolled before bed every single night. But that night, she didn't even check her messages. When I asked if she wanted to call her boyfriend, she shook her head. Not in the mood. And then there was her routine. Emily always showered before bed. Always. It was like her little ritual. But this time, she didn't. She just climbed into bed, faced the wall, and went still. Her breathing was steady, almost too steady, like someone imitating sleep. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was nothing. Stress. Overwork. Too much coffee. The next morning, she was still there. She smiled over breakfast in the dining hall, asked about my notes, chatted as if nothing was strange. But the little differences piled up. At 8:15 a.m., as we walked down the corridor, I noticed her footsteps didn't echo the way mine did. The floor tiles always made every step ring out, but hers seemed muffled, almost swallowed. At 7:45 p.m., in the dining hall, she sat across from me with a plate of food, and didn't take a single bite. She just pushed the peas around with her fork, smiling faintly whenever I looked at her. And then, at 1:14 a.m., I woke to find her standing by my bed. Not moving. Not speaking. Just standing there in the dark, half her face lit by the glow of the fog-muted street lamp outside. I whispered, "Emily?" She didn't answer. She just stood there for what felt like a minute, staring down at me, before turning and climbing back into her bed. Her breathing slowed, deep and steady, like she was asleep within seconds. I lay frozen, staring into the dark, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And that was only the first night. The next day, Sunday, January 9th, was gray from the moment I pulled back the curtains. A wall of fog clung to the glass, so thick I couldn't even see the courtyard tree outside Westwood Hall. The cold had seeped in during the night. I could see my breath puff faintly in the air when I exhaled. Emily was already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed, staring out at the fog. She didn't look at me when I got up. "You were standing by my bed last night," I said quietly. She turned her head slowly, as though it took her a second too long to register my voice. Then she smiled faintly. "You must have dreamed it." The way she said it made my skin prickle. I threw myself into work to push the thought out of my head. From 9 a.m. until nearly 8 p.m., I sat at my desk scribbling notes and typing paragraphs. Emily stayed in the room nearly the whole time. Sometimes she lay on her bed. Sometimes she sat at her desk with that little black notebook I didn't recognize, writing quickly in tiny letters. When I asked what it was, she snapped it shut. "Just thoughts," she said, smiling too wide. The real Emily never kept a journal. That night, we went down to the dining hall at 7:35 p.m. It was eerie being in that big, echoing room alone. Our footsteps rang out against the linoleum tiles, bouncing back from the high ceiling. We sat at one of the long wooden tables. I ate in silence, but she just sat there, her tray untouched. "You're not hungry?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not tonight." The thing was, she hadn't eaten anything since she came back. When we walked back through the corridor, I noticed again, my steps rang out, hers didn't. Almost like she was floating a fraction above the floor. That night, the power went out. It was 11:42 p.m. 1 second, I was reading on my laptop, the next, the entire room plunged into blackness. The radiator gave a final hiss before going silent. I groped for my phone on the desk and flicked on the torch. The beam cut across the room, and landed on her. Emily was standing beside my chair. So close that if I'd moved, I would have brushed her arm. I yelped and dropped the phone. The torch beam rolled across the floor, throwing shadows against the walls. My heart hammered as I snatched it back up, and when I shone the light again, She was already climbing calmly into her bed. "Jesus, Emily," I gasped. "You scared the life out of me." She didn't answer. She just lay down, pulled the blanket up, and turned her face to the wall. Within seconds, her breathing was slow and steady. I sat awake for hours, watching the glow of the fog-dampened street lamp seep through the curtains. Monday, January 10th, 3:07 a.m. I woke to whispering. At first, I thought it was from the corridor. I held my breath and listened. But no, it was coming from inside the room. I turned my head slowly. Emily was sitting cross-legged on her bed, her face hidden in shadow. Her lips moved rapidly, whispering a stream of words I couldn't make out. "Emily?" I whispered. Her head snapped toward me. For a moment, the whispering stopped. Then she lay down, turned to the wall, and within seconds, her breathing was heavy again. I lay frozen, the blanket pulled up to my chin. The whispering had been in no language I recognized. By Tuesday, January 11th, I started keeping track of everything. My notebook filled with times and details, like evidence I needed to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. 10:14 a.m., she watched me eat breakfast, her plate untouched. 2:38 p.m., she sat at her desk writing in that black notebook. When I leaned forward to ask what she was doing, she closed it instantly and smiled. 5:22 p.m., the fog outside the window thick enough I couldn't see the ground. She stood staring into it for 20 minutes without moving. 1:26 a.m., I woke and saw her standing by the window, the curtains half open, her face pale in the glow of the street lamp. I started to feel trapped. I couldn't bring myself to leave the room because I didn't want her behind me in the corridors. I couldn't bring myself to text the real Emily, the one I thought was with her family, because I was terrified of the reply I might get. On Wednesday night, January 12th, the fog outside was so dense it pressed against the glass like smoke. I tried to distract myself with work, but the words on the page blurred. At 11:57 p.m., I gave up and lay down, pulling the blanket to my chin. Sometime in the early hours, I woke to a strange sound. A slow, deliberate scraping. It was coming from her side of the room. I sat up slightly, heart thudding. Emily was crouched on the floor beside her desk, dragging her fingernails across the wood. Back and forth. Back and forth. "Emily?" My voice cracked. She froze. Then, slowly, she stood up. Her face was in shadow, but I swear I saw her mouth stretched into a grin too wide to be natural. "You shouldn't be here alone," she whispered. The words echoed in my head, and before I could respond, she turned, climbed into her bed, and went still. I checked the time on my phone. 3:26 a.m. I didn't sleep again until dawn. And by then, I was certain of one thing: whoever had come back to Westwood Hall with me wasn't Emily. By Thursday, January 13th, I was exhausted. I'd barely slept all week, and the constant fog outside felt like it was pressing against my skull. Even the tutor's emails from the University of Edinburgh blurred in front of my eyes. The corridors of Westwood Hall were nearly empty. Everyone else was home with their families, warm and safe. I was the idiot who had stayed behind. And I wasn't alone. That morning, I tried again to ask Emily why she'd come back. "You told me you were going home for the whole break," I said. "You told me you were taking the train at 11 a.m. on the 7th. She looked at me, head tilted. Her hair hung slightly forward, shadowing her face. I changed my mind. Her voice was flat, but the smile on her lips didn't match. "You didn't text me. You didn't tell me," I pressed. She didn't answer. She just picked up her notebook, opened it, and started scribbling. The scratching of the pen set my teeth on edge. That night, I decided to test something. I told her I was going to the library. Really, I just circled the corridor for 10 minutes, pacing the silent, fog-wrapped building. Then I came back and opened the door quietly. Emily was standing in the center of the room, facing my desk. Not moving. Not touching anything. Just staring at my chair. When she heard me, she turned slowly and smiled. "Back so soon?" Her voice was cheerful, but the way her eyes glinted in the dim light made me shiver. By Friday, January 14th, my notes had become frantic. 8:06 a.m., she hummed under her breath, low and tuneless, like a broken music box. 12:44 p.m., fog so thick I can't see the tree in the courtyard. She stood at the window again for 20 minutes, hand pressed against the glass. 4:19 p.m., I dropped a pencil. When I bent to pick it up, I saw her watching me from under the desk. She was crouched there, grinning. I nearly screamed. She crawled out slowly, laughing softly, and said, "Don't be so jumpy." That night, I locked myself in the bathroom down the corridor just to get away from her. My reflection in the mirror looked pale and wild-eyed, hair sticking up in all directions. "This is just stress," I whispered to myself. Just stress. Too much work. Not enough sleep. But when I left the bathroom and walked back to the room, the fog had seeped inside. A thin, pale mist hung in the corridor. My breath caught. The air was damp and freezing against my skin. And when I opened the door to my room, she was standing right there. So close that I almost collided with her. "I missed you," she said softly. Her voice was wrong. It wasn't flat anymore. It was too warm, too sweet, dripping with something that made my stomach twist. I didn't reply. I climbed into bed, fully clothed, and pulled the blanket over my head. I lay there trembling, listening as she walked slowly around the room, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. Saturday, January 15th, 2:12 a.m. I woke to the sound of my desk chair creaking. I pulled the blanket down just enough to peek. Emily was sitting in my chair, her face turned toward me. She wasn't blinking. She wasn't breathing. I shut my eyes tight and pretended to sleep. Hours passed before dawn finally lightened the fog outside. That day, I made my decision. The moment the real Emily returned, I was leaving Westwood Hall. I didn't care if I failed my degree, if I lost my scholarship, none of it mattered anymore. At 3 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message. From Emily. Just got back from Mum's. Heading to the hostel now. Be there in 20. My blood ran cold. I looked at the girl on the other bed, the one who'd spent the entire week with me. She was writing in her black notebook again. She looked up and smiled. "What's wrong?" she asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I stared at the door, every muscle in my body locked tight, waiting for the knock that would prove everything. At 3:19 p.m., there it was. A firm, clear knock on the door. My heart leapt. "Hey, it's me," called Emily's voice from the corridor. I froze. The girl sitting on the bed looked at the door, then back at me. Slowly, her smile widened. "Aren't you going to let her in?" she whispered. My throat closed. I couldn't move. The knock came again, louder this time. "Hello? You there?" The girl on the bed stood up. She didn't walk, she seemed to glide. Step by step, she moved toward me. "You shouldn't be here alone," she whispered again, the same words she'd said on Wednesday. Behind her, the knock turned into pounding. The real Emily's voice shouted, "Open up! What's going on?" The girl's face twisted into something inhuman. Her eyes went black, her mouth stretching far too wide. And then, the door burst open. Light from the corridor spilled in. The real Emily stood there, her suitcase in hand, her cheeks red from the cold. I whipped my head back toward the imposter. The room was empty. Her bed was perfectly made, her notebook gone. The real Emily frowned at me. "Why are you so pale? What's wrong?" I couldn't answer. My chest heaved as I stared at the empty space where the other girl had stood seconds before. "Who?" My voice cracked. "Who have I been with all week?" Emily looked at me like I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had. But deep down, I knew I hadn't imagined it. Someone, or something, had lived in that room with me, in the foggy silence of Westwood Hall. And it wasn't Emily. Emily wheeled her suitcase into the room like nothing was wrong. The fog clung to her coat, her scarf damp from the misty Edinburgh air. She glanced at me with concern. "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" she asked, half laughing. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. My throat was dry, and I must have looked wild-eyed because her smile quickly faded. "Seriously," she said, setting her bag down, "what's happened?" I pointed to the bed across from mine, her bed. The one where the imposter had slept every night for a week. "There was someone here," I whispered. She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Who?" "You," I said hoarsely. "You've been here all week." Emily blinked, clearly trying to make sense of my words. "No. I was at Mum's in Yorkshire. You know that. I can show you the train tickets. The texts. I only just got back now." I shook my head violently. No, you don't understand. You came back early. The night after you left. You said you'd changed your mind. You stayed here, with me. The whole week." Emily's eyes widened, and she actually took a step back from me. "That's not funny," she said sharply. "I'm not joking." I snapped. "She was here. I talked to her. We studied together. She slept in your bed, used your desk, walked the halls with me. But when I turned toward the desk, it was empty. No black notebook. No signs that anyone had been there. Her bed was made so neatly it looked untouched since she'd left on the 7th. The only evidence was my notebook, my frantic scribbles, the timestamps, the descriptions of every terrifying thing I'd seen. Emily picked it up and flipped through the pages. Her face paled. "Jesus," she whispered. "You really believe this happened?" I grabbed the notebook back. It did happen. She didn't answer. She just looked at me like I'd lost my mind. That night, I refused to stay in the room. I slept on a chair in the common area downstairs, the fog pressing against the tall glass windows until it looked like the hostel was floating in some endless white void. Every sound made me jump, the creak of pipes, the hum of the heating system, even my own breathing. I kept expecting to look up and see her standing at the end of the hallway, smiling with those black eyes. But she didn't come back. Not then. Over the next few days, I tried to convince Emily. I showed her my notebook again and again. I retraced everything the imposter had said. "You shouldn't be here alone, I missed you," the way she hummed that broken tune at night. Emily shook her head every time. "You're overworked. You're stressed. You imagined it. Hallucinations are a real thing when you don't sleep." But I knew. Hallucinations don't leave bed sheets wrinkled. They don't sit for hours scribbling in black notebooks that vanish without a trace. And they don't answer the door when the real person is still outside. Classes resumed on Monday, January 17th. The fog finally thinned, and the hostel filled again with students returning from their holidays. The hallways no longer echoed with emptiness. But I couldn't shake the dread. Every time I saw Emily, the real Emily, I felt an itch in the back of my skull. Was it really her? Could I be sure? I started watching her too closely. The way she brushed her hair. The way she laughed at her phone. The way she zipped her jacket. All normal. All ordinary. But so had the other one. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear something, just faint enough to question it. The soft hum of a broken tune. The creak of my desk chair when no one was sitting in it. A shadow moving just slightly slower than Emily did. By the end of January, I stopped trying to explain. Nobody believed me. Not Emily, not my classmates, not even the hostel staff. They all smiled politely, nodded, and told me to get more sleep. But I know what I saw. I know someone, something, was in that room with me for an entire week. I never learned what she was. A ghost. A doppelgänger. A demon. Or something worse, something nameless that only pretended to be Emily until it got bored. I don't think I want to know. Because if I ever found the answer, I don't think I'd survive it. And sometimes, when I wake in the night and see Emily asleep across the room, I can't shake the fear that maybe I'm back in that week again. That maybe the real Emily never came back at all. That maybe I'm still living with the wrong one. That's my story. I don't know what she was, or why she chose me, or why she left the moment the real Emily walked in. But I know this, I was not alone in that hostel. Have you ever had something like this happen to you? Maybe at university, in a hotel, at a friend's house, anywhere? If yes, please share your story in the comments. I'd really like to know I'm not the only one.